I was counting up the number of unfinished questions we have,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought I could review them briefly, and then we could choose which of these questions we should continue with.
That's a great idea.
Well, the first thing I remember is a description of my understanding and internal process of how I teach Qigong. And I think we had just gotten to the beginning of shaking, if I remember right. There's that, and then there's the subject of time and the sun, the moon, and the stars, and then there's the subject of the Chinese characters of Chapter 8 of the Su Wen, the 12 officials. Those are the three topics we've just started.
It's gonna,
Uh-huh.
and then put in two other things that are related into the mix.
Uh-huh.
Commitments and self-discipline.
Commitment and self-discipline. This is an extension of Krista's.
These are all
lecture.
Saturn topics.
These are all Saturnian topics for sure. And if there's ever a good night for Saturn manifestation, this is it, because two sextiles and bona fide by Jupiter. Commitment and
Self-discipline.
self-discipline, which are very much related, I think. And to me, both of those subjects relate back to will. And what is will? Where does it come from? How much does one have? Can it be expanded? Yeah, and to me that's been one of the primary questions of my life, because I have much more will than I have much more spiritual will. I have much more divine will than I have physical will. That when I was around 20, I started meditating. You know, of course, what I was doing was not meditating. It was something I read in a book about meditation that described a process, but it was a process that I did by myself without having a carrot or a stick from anything in the outside world. So it was a kind of will that came from somewhere within me. Not a lot of it, you know, and it didn't last for all that long. It's like it ran down. You know, when I first started reading books by Krishnamurti and Alice Bailey, and I had this friend that meditated. We never did meditations together, but I got the idea of you go into a room by yourself, you sit comfortably, you look out a nice window, and then close your eyes, go inside, and then that's the question: what do you do once you go inside? Well, there's a huge universe of different kind of practice. I think the critical thing about will is that you have one that you do during a period that you've chosen yourself. That there is something that you yourself have chosen without any reward or recompense from the outside that you do. I think that's an indication that you have will. And it has something to do with your control over your body, if nothing else, that you can actually take a period of time, a defined period of time, and hold your body in a particular position and put your attention inside. And I think those are the basic requirements. And I don't think many people can do that, which has surprised me over the years, because I've been part of groups my whole life in which that was one of the principal practices that everybody was. But I have come to the conclusion over years of getting to know people Actually, it's fairly rare for people to be able to do that. And I think for me, it took a certain amount of intelligence and experimental experiments. You know, like particularly how things around me look. Now, it seems like it shouldn't matter. You know, if you're going to go inside, it shouldn't matter how things around you look. But the fact is, I found that as a huge aid. If the place that I was sitting in was beautiful and reminded me of what I was trying to do, I found that extremely helpful. So I've always felt like, this is why all those weird people in Asia do that. You know, they have home altars where even if it's just about connecting with their ancestors, it's something that's not part of your regular living. That you need a sanctuary. And I forgive myself to a certain degree for getting deflected from the real inner practice by making it prettier. There is a certain kind of laziness, you know, that's endemic to me, that it's very hard for me to stay focused on what it is that I'm doing. And one of the things that I allow myself to do is, if there's something ugly, I get rid of it. If I think of something pretty I can put up, I'll take the time to do that, even though it's distracting me from my regular. But I think that's forgivable because there's a long-term benefit from it. I also have found essential to being able to sit by myself is having the energy of a group that I practice with minimum once a week, and sometimes more. And that, I think that's there's no way to get around that. I think you have to borrow energy from a, and that was one of the oddest things that I found about practice in that way and will, was that the energy of a group is palpable and much stronger than my own energy in terms of expanding my consciousness and having my focus in my body doing something. And that's, you know, I'm not sensitive in the way a lot of people are sensitive, but when I walk into a group where there's people focused in that way, it's like a drug to me. Mm-hmm. And an indispensable drug. Without that, I tend to run down. That's why when I stopped going to Breitenbush every other weekend with Heiner and doing everything he was doing, when I started pulling away, I had to have something. I went to ecstatic dance for about 4 years. And that works the same. You know, if there are people focused in a particular way, even a little bit, like what you're trying to do, that for me is very, very, very helpful. And without something like that, without some kind of a group practice like that, I don't have the will. And I think this may be having to do with physical body. Who knows? You know, because some people have it. You know, like people like Todd and Cockamill. You know, I mean, you know that story, right?
Which story?
Well, how they came to study Jin Jing Gong with me, and how they went about it and what they did.
Oh, where they would come out and you'd give them a new piece of the form and they'd go off and practice for 4 weeks and learn it themselves and then come back for the next one.
Yeah. And they'd show up every Saturday morning. Todd rode his bicycle sometimes, or maybe it was Cockamill. Yeah. And they would do it barefoot out on the dirt floor. You know, they just had that kind of will, and I think it would be nice to be born in that kind of a vehicle, but I have to admit that I wasn't. I'm not. You know, I don't have that kind of force. I need help. You know, just like right now, I need a stool and coffee. but you have to, I think, take a real assessment of how much will you have. And then intelligently focus it, you know, by remembering that you've set yourself you've made a commitment to do a particular thing as an exercise.
Yeah.
It's not moral or anything else, you know. It's like you're going to find out how much will you have and how well you can use it. So you define a commitment that you make to doing something for a particular amount of time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with my Thursday night practice, I have enough will to get myself there, but not necessarily enough will to actually practice if nobody else shows up.
That is not. You're no worse than me. That's a hard scene.
Yeah.
The fact that you do show up, though, helps. Though don't do it forever.
Yeah.
Just showing up and nobody being there and feeling not like doing it sucks on you.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to push yourself to go about it that way. And that's why I would have it out here. Though I did it, you know, I had it in different places, you know, in Portland when I started. And, you know, you show up and nobody shows up, and it's hard to do it then, even though you wouldn't maybe naturally do it by yourself if you hadn't.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but put it out that you wanted to teach. And it's important, you know, not to it's important to realize that that's a hard thing to do, is to develop that kind of a practice, because it does involve, for me anyway, it does involve for a long time either doing it by myself or with one or two other people. And I think for me it'll probably come and go. Different people have a different amount of riz. You know, the new word for the year, right?
The charisma.
Yeah, it's the new. It's the Merriam-Webster new word of the year.
What is?
Riz.
Riz?
Riz. R-I-Z-Z.
Like charisma.
It's short for charisma.
Okay.
It's like we sannyasins use the term juice, if somebody has any juice. And we Gurdjieffians use presence. If somebody has presence. You know, but it's like something other people mostly don't have. But it's remarkable about particular individuals, and why some people, they just put it out that they're going to hold a practice and a dozen people show up.
Do you think school is a form of group practice?
No.
Can it be? Or like the desire to be in school, do you think that comes from wanting
I
to
think
have a
there
group?
can be. I think there can be people who follow the secret rules of true schools that you find in universities sometimes, and there can be students who are doing a real practice while they go to school. But you can't. There can be no external reward. That's one of the dividing lines. If you're doing it to get a license to make money, doesn't count. It has to be strictly for your own practice, for your own path.
What if it's both?
It can be. It can be, and it's interesting. It fits together. Like with me, you know, I was very, very much focused on learning Qigong for myself, not as a way to make a living. And the only way you could do that, the only way you could learn about the channels and the points, was to be to go to an acupuncture school. It was the only way to do it, other than learn it yourself out of a book, and I didn't have the will for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, all the way through, I was always interested in Qigong and internal practice. Whereas the atmosphere around you, everybody's talking about being a doctor and making enough money to pay your loans.
Yeah.
The idea of commitment makes me think of a trailer I just saw for Bauhaus, which is a new TV series. It's a new German TV series about the Bauhaus movement that Walter Gropius started in the post-World War I era in Germany, and how there are all these movements like that throughout history, you know, and they kind of like, they rise up and they have all the, you know, the drama and the excitement and the lust and desire that happens with all those things intellectually and spiritually and among people. But then, you know, so how, I don't know, like, how do you ride that wave of different movements and make it work with your own sense of commitment?
Yeah. Well, you can be like I was with ecstatic dance, where you can just come and use the energy that's being generated there and stay within their form, although I only did Qigong forms, and sometimes people would look at me disapprovingly because I wasn't doing modern dance or whatever. But it was accepted, and you can just use that kind of energy. There's also sometimes when you need a new form. You know, what the form that you have been using, the form that has been feeding you, the form that you have been committed to for some years may not be working anymore. And you need to find something new, and then you have to explore different cults, because the best forms, or the most accessible forms, I think the forms are hidden in Orthodox religions as well, but it's more accessible in cults. You go somewhere where there's somebody with a lot of force that everybody's magnetized to that's teaching a particular technique. Well, he may be sexually molesting kittens in the background you don't know about it. but the actual practice might be very, very useful. and being in the group long enough to get that practice, totally legitimate. And that, I think, for those of us who are not born into royalty, I think there may be hidden monasteries of enlightened people where the children that are born are trained in a completely different way and are like, you know, much closer to the next step up than we are. But interesting stuff comes out of mudbloods, you know, people who don't have all that much will have to think up tricks to get themselves to focus on the practices that do work, and to also find practices that do work and to recognize them.
How do you overcome the distractions? Like if you do go into a new area and you find a technique and you find that the group is energized, but there's a lot of really distracting.
Well, not only that, people are crazy.
Yeah.
And they have really negative experiences with them, and they're difficult.
Yeah.
And I think that's what some of us recognized in the 70s and set out to try to overcome. And I think it's worthwhile trying to be around people, even though they're crazy. And I think there's certain rules you got to make about it.
Like what?
Like you can't let people abuse you.
Okay, fair.
You know, if people get pissed off and want to go off and express to you how fucked up they think you are, I don't think anybody needs to put up with any of that.
No.
I don't know. It seems to me like the most important rule there is to constantly be evaluating whether or not it's still a net positive for you, and know when to leave when it's not. Don't stay too long.
Yeah.
When you start losing energy, that's
When you hear yourself lying in an embarrassing way,
yeah.
just to please them, you know, in terms of how they use language, when it's not at all the way you feel. I'll tell you my 2 major rules. 1, make best friends. He is best friend. Make best
See if
friends.
they'll let you.
Whoever's up there in the front, being the guy.
What if there's a long
Become his.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
that's
Some of it has to do with accessibility.
That's there's usually fast recycling of that position. Just you have to be a little patient. And number 2, study sex and money.
Wait,
Who
say that
is
again?
sleeping with whom?
Oh.
Who is sleeping with whom and for what reason? And what sexual contact is there between people? What's the sexual vibe between people in general, particularly between the guy who's up front and answering questions?
The very attractive, charismatic.
And the very attractive, charismatic guy.
Yeah.
What are his sexual relationships like? And that's one of the benefits of becoming friends, is that you can see that much easier, because generally it's people's sex lives are hidden. And then also money. You know, how does the money thing work among people? Is somebody exploiting people who don't have any money and making a lot from it based on their riz?
Like college students.
Or do people get together and, okay, we're gonna have a weekend, and what's the food gonna cost, and figure out what people are gonna have to kick in to make it work. Just different. How does the money work? There's also the phenomenon that if you act as if you have something, something starts to happen. That was one thing for me. The whole question with Rajneesh all the time. You traveled into that valley, and you can immediately feel some sort of force. Now, how much he understood about what was happening, he certainly didn't understand what was happening in the trenches. He had no clue. But it was all due to some force coming through him. So that's always part of the question to me, is what is it that is just being open to some force beyond you as a human being that may have to be severely distorted because it's becoming through a human being. But that may be beneficial, so people don't take it all that seriously. I kind of felt that with Rajneesh in that way, with that it was good that he seemed to me like kind of a phony Indian guru type, taking advantage of all these stupid young Americans that wanted to bow down at somebody's feet. There was definitely that element about him. And yet at the same time, there was something coming through him that you looked at him, he was divine. There was some, just to look at him, it was just amazing to look at. There was some force that came through him that affected everybody in him, that you couldn't resist it unless you were, well, most of, people either thought he was the angel or the devil. The government people who were around him thought that was their only experience of real true evil in the world was being, but he affected everybody in some sort of very powerful way. Now, it didn't mean that he understood even his own delusions, perhaps, because he definitely seemed to me to have some.
Or what that force really gave him in awareness, or
Yeah.
was it just a force?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting because that force has that potential to go either way.
Well,
And
no,
like that. If there is this divine force coming through, it could be either evil or benevolent. But
well, not
but-
evil, but it's coming through a human being
this is what I mean. Who mediates the
who
force?
mediates it
So
and,
it could-
and changes it in kind of
Yeah.
how it is and how it works.
Yeah, not that it's one way or the other. It's just that it has that potential. Because it is
Context,
that pure source energy. Yeah.
Well, when you're treating patients, I think if something happens, it's because something has come through you that you at first may not even be aware of or credit yourself with somehow, but affected them in some way that was more than your knowledge of.
But we didn't
Yeah.
talk about time. I've been wondering about time for months.
Time is actually very simple.
Oh, great.
Past doesn't exist, past doesn't exist, future doesn't exist, only now exists, and it's constantly changing in some ways and not in others. And the change shows you that something's changing, and that changing is time. But the fact is you can't go back even a second, and you can't go forward even a second. You're only ever in now.
And how come we think about it so often?
Because we're people, we have memories and precognition. You know, we know something about the structure of what's coming, but and also some people have flashes of what's coming that's more accurate than others, but never probably what's most important.
Well, it reminds me of like just the whole topic of distraction. Then it's like you said how you sit in a beautiful place and then sometimes you get distracted and you just
You
Make it more
think about
beautiful.
the past and the future, or what would make this more beautiful, but
Right.
but always you're remembering to come back to now
But-
and only now.
how do you know that that's not a part of it?
It is part of it. So you don't
Like
you
the
don't beat yourself
distraction
up.
is
Yeah, like what you remember and what you
Yeah.
fantasize about, everything is part of now. But you have to stay focused in it being now. Not get lost in the associative thinking of what's coming or what has been.
You're not trying to
Which
escape.
then, which takes you so that all your energy goes into one center, just your head,
yeah.
and because what you have to remember is to stay in your body, stay focused in the sensation of your body, or it's not now.